My sister smiled as she lifted her champagne glass and looked straight at me. I think everyone here knows who Mom and Dad's real daughter is, she laughed. Some people are just permanent disappointments. The room exploded with laughter. Even my father smiled. My mother didn't say a word. I stood frozen in the middle of my parents' 40th wedding anniversary party, surrounded by relatives, neighbors, and business partners who all suddenly found the floor more interesting than my face. Then my father raised his glass. "Emily has always made us proud," he said, placing a hand on my younger sister's shoulder. "She deserves everything that's coming to her. Everything." That single word almost made me laugh. Because none of them knew that, 3 days earlier, I'd already signed papers that would decide exactly who deserved what. And they had absolutely no idea what I had already done. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a commercial real estate attorney, the kind of person who reads contracts for breakfast and believes that every problem has a solution if you're patient enough to find it. I've been married to my husband, Ryan, for 7 years. He's a high school history teacher with the rare ability to stay calm when the world falls apart. He always tells me that silence is more powerful than shouting because silence gives people enough room to hear their own mistakes. For years, I thought he was just being optimistic. Eventually, I learned he was right. Growing up, my younger sister Emily was the center of our family's universe. She wasn't a bad person as a child. She simply grew up believing that love was something she never had to earn. If she wanted a new car, my parents found the money. If she quit another job, they blamed her boss. If she forgot birthdays, missed holidays, or ignored family responsibilities, everyone laughed and called her free-spirited. When I earned straight A's, my father would nod and say, "That's what we expect from you." When Emily barely passed a class, my parents took her out to dinner because they were so proud she didn't give up. I learned very early that success brought me expectations. Failure brought Emily sympathy. So I stopped asking for fairness. I focused on building my own life instead. Law school wasn't easy, but I graduated near the top of my class. Ryan and I bought a modest home, avoided debt, and spent years building financial security one careful decision at a time. Meanwhile, Emily bounced between careers. Boutique owner, travel influencer, life coach, wedding planner. Each dream lasted just long enough for my parents to invest money before it collapsed. Every Thanksgiving, I'd hear the same speech. "Claire, you're so responsible. You understand." Translation? Claire will sacrifice again. Emily needs another chance. It became a family tradition. When my parents needed help refinancing their home, they called me. When Emily forgot to pay taxes on her business, I quietly connected her with an accountant. When my father faced a legal dispute with a former business partner, I reviewed every document without charging $1. No one thanked me. They simply assumed I'd always be there. Ryan noticed it long before I did. "They don't see you," he told me one evening while we cleaned up after hosting Christmas dinner. "They see what you can do for them." I defended them. "They're family." He smiled sadly. "I know. But family shouldn't only remember your phone number when they're in trouble." His words stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. Still, I kept helping. Because that's what I believed daughters were supposed to do. About 2 years before the anniversary party, my father decided to retire from running Dawson Commercial Group, the small property management company he'd built over 30 years. Business had slowed. Several contracts were failing. Cash flow was getting worse every month. He never told anyone except me. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, he walked into my office carrying 2 worn-out folders. "I don't know who else to ask," he admitted quietly. For the first time in my life, he looked scared instead of proud. I spent weeks reviewing every contract, lease, and financial statement. What I discovered shocked me. The company wasn't just struggling. Without major changes, it would collapse within a year. I could have walked away. Instead, I started working every evening after my regular job. I renegotiated vendor agreements, restructured debt, connected Dad with better commercial clients through professional contacts I'd spent years building. I never asked for recognition. I simply wanted to protect the family business my grandfather had started decades earlier. My father thanked me exactly once. Then life went back to normal. Or at least, that's what everyone else believed. Because while they thought I was quietly fixing paperwork, I had discovered something that would eventually change every relationship in our family. At first, I thought it was just another bookkeeping mistake. Buried inside years of financial records was a folder labeled Ownership Transfer Draft. The document had never been finalized, but it revealed something my father had never mentioned. Almost 20 years earlier, when my grandfather's health declined, he'd met with an attorney to decide the future of Dawson Commercial Group. According to the draft and handwritten notes attached to it, my grandfather believed the company should someday be led by the family member who proved capable of protecting it, not simply the oldest or youngest child. He hadn't named anyone. Instead, he left instructions for the company's attorney to evaluate who actually kept the business alive if retirement ever became necessary. That attorney had since retired, and the paperwork had been forgotten. Or so everyone believed. I contacted the law firm handling my father's corporate records. After weeks of research, they located the original estate documents in storage. Everything was still legally enforceable. But before any transfer could happen, an independent review had to determine who had preserved the company. The lawyers asked for evidence. I handed them everything. Emails, contracts, financial projections, negotiated agreements, bank records, meeting notes. Hundreds of hours of unpaid legal work I'd quietly completed over the previous 2 years. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't attack anyone. I simply provided facts. The review took almost 3 months. When it ended, the attorneys looked at me across a conference table. "Ms. Dawson," one of them said, "without your work, this company would have entered bankruptcy." I sat there quietly. They continued. "Under your grandfather's instructions, you qualify to assume controlling ownership if your father voluntarily retires." I wasn't expecting that. I hadn't started helping because I wanted control. I helped because I couldn't stand watching my family's legacy disappear. The attorneys advised me to keep everything confidential until the retirement paperwork was complete. So I did. Even Ryan didn't know every detail. He only noticed I was spending more evenings reviewing documents. One night, he placed a cup of coffee beside my laptop. "You've been carrying everyone for years," he said gently. "Whatever happens, promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't let guilt make your decisions." I promised. I had no idea how difficult that promise would become. A month later, my parents announced their 40th wedding anniversary celebration. More than 100 guests were invited. Old family friends, business partners, former employees, even local reporters covering my father's retirement. Emily immediately made herself the unofficial event planner. Every phone call somehow became about her. Every decoration reflected her taste. Every conversation ended with her talking about the future of the family. During dinner, she stood to give a toast. "I just want everyone to know," she said dramatically, "that I've always been the one keeping this family together." Several guests applauded politely. Then she looked directly at me. "Claire has always been busy." A few awkward laughs echoed through the ballroom. "Some people know how to make money," Emily continued, "but they never really know how to love people." I felt Ryan gently squeeze my hand under the table. I ignored the comment. Then my mother spoke. "You know, Claire never had Emily's heart." The sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because it was true. Because she'd believed it long enough to say it in front of everyone. A businessman sitting nearby glanced at me with obvious embarrassment. He'd worked with me professionally for years. He knew exactly how much I'd done for Dawson Commercial Group. He lowered his eyes without saying a word. Then came the announcement. Dad walked onto the stage beside Emily. "I've decided it's time for the next generation." My heart skipped. He reached into his jacket. Emily smiled confidently. "I'm proud to announce Emily will become the public face of Dawson Commercial Group moving forward." The room erupted into applause. Emily hugged my parents dramatically. Photographers rushed forward. Flash after flash lit the room. No one realized one small detail. Dad had called her the public face. Not the owner. Not the controlling partner. Just the public face. The legal documents I'd signed 3 days earlier hadn't changed. They were simply waiting for his official retirement filing. Emily accepted congratulations like she'd inherited an empire. She whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I guess hard work finally pays off. Ryan looked at me. Are you okay? I smiled softly. I'm fine. You don't look fine. I will be. Across the room, Emily caught my eye. She lifted her champagne glass with a victorious grin. I quietly lifted mine in return. She thought she'd won. She had no idea she was celebrating something she didn't actually own. Without another word, I placed my untouched drink on a nearby table, took Ryan's hand, and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask anyone to stop me. Sometimes, the strongest response is leaving people alone with the lies they've chosen to believe. And the next morning, the first phone call came from my attorney. Everything was officially in motion. The morning after the anniversary party, I sat across from my attorney, Linda Mercer, in her downtown Charlotte office. She slid a thick folder across the conference table. It's official, she said. Your father signed his retirement documents at 8:15 this morning. I took a slow breath. And? Linda smiled slightly. The ownership transfer has now been activated exactly as your grandfather instructed. Effective today, you hold the controlling interest in Dawson Commercial Group. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I felt victorious. Because I felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't a prize. It was a promise my grandfather had written decades earlier, and one I'd unknowingly earned by keeping the company alive. What's the first step? I asked. Linda opened another folder. You have complete authority to restructure the company. That includes executive appointments, financial oversight, and operational decisions. I nodded. Then we start by protecting the employees. That afternoon, I met with the company's senior management team. Many of them looked nervous. Some assumed I had come to fire people. Instead, I thanked them. I know many of you stayed loyal during difficult years, I said. I'm not here to erase the company's history. I'm here to secure its future. By the end of the meeting, we had approved a financial recovery plan, renewed 2 major commercial contracts, and created an employee bonus program that had been delayed for years. No press release. No celebration. Just work. 3 days later, my phone rang. Mom. She sounded unusually cheerful. Claire, sweetheart. We haven't seen you since the party. I've been busy. Well, Emily needs a little favor. Of course she did. What kind of favor? You know some people at First Carolina Bank, don't you? I do. They're refusing another expansion loan for Emily's new leadership project. I almost smiled. What leadership project? The company, of course. I remained silent. Mom continued. They said they need approval from the controlling owner before releasing additional funds. There it was. The first crack. I see, I replied calmly. So could you call them? I don't think that would help. Her tone changed immediately. Claire, don't be difficult. I'm not. They're embarrassing your sister. No, I answered quietly. They're following policy. She hung up without saying goodbye. The calls didn't stop. Dad called that evening. Claire, I need you to smooth things over with the bank. I can't. You've always fixed these situations. Not this one. His voice hardened. This family has sacrificed everything for you. I looked around my office. Every diploma on the wall. Every late night. Every weekend I'd spent saving his business. I answered softly. I remember it differently. He disconnected. Over the next week, the messages became more desperate. Emily texted. Stop acting jealous. Then, you're making Dad look bad. Then, just sign the approval. I never replied. Because there was nothing to argue about. Facts don't change because someone raises their voice. A week later, Linda called again. They've requested a family meeting. Who? Your parents. Emily. Their attorney. I wasn't surprised. They still think this is about the bank, Linda added. It isn't. I know. She paused. I recommend bringing every document. I looked at the neatly organized binders on my bookshelf. Emails. Corporate resolutions. Financial reports. ownership records, grandfather's estate instructions, minutes from board meetings. Every page told the same story. Not opinions. Evidence. I'll bring everything, I said. Ryan found me organizing the files that evening. Nervous? A little. He smiled. Good. I laughed. Good. It means you still care. He walked over and placed both hands on my shoulders. Claire, tomorrow isn't about revenge. It's about truth. I looked at him. He'd always known exactly what I needed to hear. No matter how they react, he continued, don't become the person they've spent years pretending you are. I nodded. I won't. The next afternoon, I walked into Dawson Commercial Group's executive conference room. My parents were already there. Emily sat confidently beside them, dressed as if she were about to announce a corporate merger. She barely looked at me. Dad folded his arms. Let's settle this nonsense. Linda quietly placed 3 binders on the table. Then another. Then another. Emily frowned. What's all this? I met her eyes for the first time since the anniversary party. The truth. No one spoke. The room suddenly felt much smaller. And the first document I opened would change everything they believed about our family. No one spoke as I opened the first binder. The only sound in the room was the soft turning of paper. I slid a document across the polished conference table until it stopped in front of my father. What is this? He asked. The debt restructuring agreement from 2 years ago. He adjusted his glasses. His face slowly lost its color. I never signed this. No, I replied calmly. You authorized me to negotiate it. You signed the final version after I completed the work. Linda quietly placed the signed original beside it. My father stared at his own signature. It saved the company over $2.3 million in interest and penalties. Silence. I opened the second binder. These are the commercial lease agreements I renegotiated. Another stack. The vendor contracts. Another. The litigation settlement that prevented the company from being sued. Another. The client portfolio that increased annual revenue. Emily shifted uneasily in her chair. What does any of this have to do with me? I looked at her without anger. Everything. Linda handed my grandfather's original estate instructions to everyone at the table. Emily skimmed the first page. Then the second. Then the third. What is this? She whispered. Linda answered before I could. Your grandfather directed that controlling ownership be transferred to the family member who preserved Dawson Commercial Group if retirement occurred. Emily laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. Linda slid one final document toward her. The independent legal determination. Emily read the first paragraph. Then the second. Her hands began to shake. This says... She couldn't finish the sentence. It says, Linda replied calmly, that Claire Dawson preserved the company and therefore became the controlling owner upon your father's retirement. The room went completely silent. Dad looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. You own the company? I do. Mom whispered, why didn't you tell us? I took a slow breath. Would you have believed me? No one answered. Because they all knew the truth. They wouldn't have. Emily suddenly stood. This isn't fair. I remained seated. It isn't what I expected. No, she shouted. Dad promised me this company. He promised you a title, I answered quietly. He couldn't promise what he didn't legally own anymore. She looked at my father. Dad? He lowered his eyes. For the first time in my life. He had no words. I reached into the final binder. There are just 2 more documents. Everyone looked up. The first appoints a new executive leadership team. I paused. Every current employee keeps their job. Several department heads sitting along the wall let out relieved breaths. The second document. I slid it toward my parents. Creates a retirement trust. Mom blinked. A trust? Yes. It guarantees your medical care, your home expenses, and your retirement income for the rest of your lives. Tears filled her eyes. You still did that for us? I nodded. You raised me. I won't abandon you. Then I looked at Emily. But I won't finance irresponsibility anymore. Emily burst into tears. You've ruined my life. I shook my head gently. No. I stopped letting you live mine. No one argued after that. There was nothing left to say. The documents had spoken louder than any of us ever could. A year later, life looked completely different. Dawson Commercial Group had expanded into 3 new cities. Employee turnover had dropped to its lowest level in company history. The company offered scholarships for employees' children, something my grandfather had always wanted but never been able to afford. Ryan still taught history. He said he preferred changing lives one classroom at a time. I believed him. As for my parents, our relationship slowly healed. Not overnight. Trust rarely does. Dad apologized one afternoon while helping Ryan build a bookshelf in our living room. I confused the loudest child with the strongest one. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever heard from him. Mom stopped comparing us. Instead, she started asking how I was doing. It felt strange, but it also felt honest. Emily eventually found a job in event management. For the first time in her life, she had to earn promotions instead of expecting them. It wasn't easy, but it was good for her. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't getting everything you want. It's finally becoming someone who can stand on your own. As for me, I no longer measured my worth by whether my family noticed my sacrifices. Peace came the day I realized I didn't need anyone's permission to value myself. And that turned out to be the greatest victory of all. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Comment your city below. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.